there's a lot of freedom, and people will look at people like us and say, yay, so free. And so, they'll romanticize a little bit what we do. But you're going to be your own boss. That means you're your own accountant, your own publicist, your own webmaster, your own web designer. You do everything. You're your receptionist, you're your publicist. Like, you have to do everything.
Yeah.
So it's a question of whether or not you've got the stuff to be a multitasker
Mm-hmm.
and the organization skills to be able to get it all done, because you can't neglect any part of that, or it falls apart. You, as writers, they fall into the trap of getting a lot of money to produce something and neglecting to keep bringing in new clients.
Hey, what's up, Masters? Welcome to another episode of Path to Mastery podcast. And today we are with Julie and Jean-Benoît Nadeau and Nadeau. I hope I said it right. I'm working on my French, but I'm close, right? Somewhat
Close, yeah.
But it's good to have you guys here today. And you guys are authors of multiple books. I believe, what is 5 books, or is it 5
15.
books? And right.
Yeah.
15. Oh man, I knew there was a 5 in there somewhere. So sorry to shortchange you. And your most recent book, which we're going to be talking about, is called Going Solo.
Yes.
So yeah, it's good to have you guys here today with me in our audience. And we are going to be talking, like I said before we started recording, a topic that is I can certainly relate to, and I think a lot of our listeners are small business owners and just kind of deal with all the nuances and challenges and all the things that come with being a small business owner. So I'm excited about this conversation. And just to give our listeners a little bit about you guys, you're best-selling authors and journalists. You've been running their own writing business for over 3 decades. They've published, there it is, 15 books together and separately. Their writing has appeared in magazines, newspapers in Canada, U.S., France, including New York Times, USA Today. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that other magazine. Okay. You want to tell them? What is it called? Yeah, there you go. Say it again.
It's okay.
It's Lacualité magazine and more. And they're based in Montreal, where they live with their daughters. So again, thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us on.
All right. Tell us about your book, Going Solo. We'll start right there. Why did you first write the book?
Well, it began with me. In fact, the book had a history in French in Quebec first. And I wrote the book because I was I was not beginning anymore. I was an established writer, and I wanted to give advice to creators who are running their own show and doing their best to cope, trying to deal with the fact that they're businesses. And here I'm not thinking of. The idea was to write it for the creative type in general, not just creators like artists, but people who want to think creatively in whatever they do. Because one thing I realized quite early is that you can only do so much in a week. And the person who earns, let's take a figure, $300,000 per year doesn't work 10 times more than the person who earns $30,000. That person works differently, has found multipliers, ways to multiply, to sell the same thing to many people at the same time, uses copyright better, uses intellectual property better, uses tricks in management and negotiating better, manages things better, loses less money at the end of the production cycle. All these things add up and turn out to be more productive.
What we discovered. Anyway, we ended up deciding to translate the book after it was a bestseller here in a very small market of Quebec. So I decided during the pandemic to translate it, adapt it, and update it for our readers. And it resonates with people who have small businesses, especially people who are self-employed, because people have an idea and they're in love with an idea, and they don't necessarily approach it from a business mentality first. So we walk our readers through all the steps you have to go into to develop an idea, to learn how to boldly sell, because it can be hard, especially for creative types, to sort of put themselves out there and overcome some of the hurdles to selling that we discuss. And to get organized, pay your taxes, get over sort of all of the preconceived ideas people have about how hard things are going to be. In fact, once you lay it out, it can be summed up in a book. So it's the idea is just to give people tools from beginning straight through to, and it's a after sales service.
And it's a very practical book. For example, we have three chapters on negotiating. Negotiating is important because it's at the juncture of selling and producing and financing. Because in fact, if you don't negotiate well, you will have trouble closing your sale and start producing. You're not going to produce well, and you're going to have trouble collecting. So
I want to bring you right back to the beginning, though, before we get into that. And you talk about people starting a business, and I think something you had said, Julie, is they're not really treating it like a business when they first start, or like it's like there's certain things we want to put in place, right? When you're going to start a business. I think, and if you go to, when you were talking about being creators, Jean, a lot of people creative, I'm going to go start a business. It's so exciting, but they're not really looking at all the pieces and all the nuances and all the things that go into starting a business. So can you guys talk about that a little bit, and some of the things you would say to people listening to this right now that are thinking about starting a business, or maybe they've already started a business and they're in the weeds, right? And you guys know what I'm talking about when I say in the weeds. But what would you say to those people?
Well, you got to, in the book, we describe how to figure out if your idea is a good idea. We describe how to build a business plan. That scares people, but you have to really think through who you're going to sell to, what your audience is, what the market is there a need for what you're producing, and how you're going to go about that.
Yeah.
I guess that's the big hurdle people have to get over. I mean, they really have to think carefully about it as a business. So we describe, figuring out, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
You really have to start with a business plan, thinking like a business person.
And how many from your experience, how many people do start, business owners do start with a business plan? Do you know the number? Is it high?
Well,
is it low?
With the creative people, I would say that's a very low figure. People normally discover they need to, tax, they realize they didn't have enough financing for their business. That's a big one. That would come before or after the business plan. Where am I going to get the money to start this? And you can't just, there is a buildup period where you have to have some kind of capital, some kind of financing for 6 months, a year, no matter what you're doing. So we talk about the various ways that people can do that. And, we started when we were young and basically financed our business by not having much else we had to pay for in life. When you started as a young person, you don't have a lot of responsibilities. That's a great way to start, for us, a freelance writing career. Mm-hmm. But you also need to be able to go to the bank and get a credit line because you're going to need it. It's tough when you're young and starting out and don't have anything to back it up to get bank loans. But everybody can get a credit line, and those kinds of things, people don't necessarily think of that stuff upstream.
Well, you can't even get that, right? Sorry, so I'll get you in a minute, man. But you can't even get that without a business plan, right? You have to have a business plan in order to go to the bank and get a line of credit.
Yeah, and it's funny. You have to think about different ways that you may be able to convince the bank to trust you. We had a case where we needed some money for a trip and realized that we weren't going to get it for the trip that was absolutely necessary for us to produce our next book, but that we could get a loan for a computer. So, we got the loan for the computer, used it for the trip, and then, paid for the computer some other way, right? There's lots of things that you need to keep in mind. Getting a credit line is possible. We bought a house specifically to have capital to back us up in case, we needed to borrow on the house someday for what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we have. I mean, that's a good way to go. People can also, start a business when you've got a spouse earning a lot of money. It's fine if your spouse has a regular income, and
that's your love money.
That's your love money, and you can afford to take a hit. I mean, why not? It's a good way to start. People can also start while they're keeping their job. I mean, a lot of people will ask us, should I hang on to my job? Should I quit my job? And if you don't have another source of income, you should probably build in slowly your business while you've still got, your security, your income, your insurance, and go from there. But, we outline in the book different scenarios. People have to think about that before they end up getting, not earning enough money fast enough. And sometimes you just can't. You have to do other stuff. You can't be necessarily earning what you want right away. There's work you have to put in building your, in our case, our audience, our market.
Yeah.
And getting organized.
But even if you have a well-running business, the minute you start a new venture, it's a new business case. For example, we have our regular clients for freelancing and all that, but the minute we want to write a book, we have to do a business case for the book, convince a publisher, and so it's a new venture. But I think a lot of people begin haphazardly, I would almost say. I mean, I was not hireable by anyone. I was an inexperienced journalist, and it took me 2 years and a half to realize that I had to produce bills to clients. So I was waiting for the pay. So
Yeah.
So when we say at the beginning of the book that it's important to change your hard disk and quit the idea that you're employed, you own your own boss, and you're not going to have any job. You're going to have a lot of work, but no job, and you're not going to get a paycheck. You're going to
send bills.
A check for a bill, and so I was lucky enough so that my clients were nice. At one point, they would look at their bills and say, "Oh, we have not paid this guy yet. Let's send him a check."
Who does that these days?
Yeah, but that was pretty much my model. But I was a student, so it was a bit secondary. I was learning my trade and all that. But so I accepted a long takeoff period. But naturally, nowadays, whenever we start a new venture, I don't go for a takeoff period of 5 years. It's got to produce results a lot faster than this. But a lot of the book is about the mistakes we've made and that are completely avoidable. One mistake we never did, for example, I've been a freelancer for 35 years. I was never in any kind of trial. I was never sued. I never sued anyone because one thing I did well right from the start, I think, and Julie too, is to think preventatively, always to, there might be a conflict over that. I might discuss it with my client right away instead of letting it sit,
So we have a section on how to avoid bad clients.
Yeah.
And it's thinking upstream
and how to communicate well.
Heeding and asking the right questions.
Yeah.
And not listening to people flatter you. And there's a lot of little things that a lot of creative people fall into.
Yeah.
Because
in effect, even when you've negotiated and got your assignment or your contract or whatever, the doing it is even an ongoing negotiation. Deadlines may change. Yeah. It might be that you find stuff that is a lot more interesting than expected. There's also, and this calls for may call for a redefining of the contract, and so you need good communication, and that is preventive again. You sometimes you see that the first idea was not right, and you change, and you arrive somewhere where your client has to know that you're changing direction. Otherwise,
that stuff's challenging for people.
Yeah.
Learning to communicate confidently. That can be a real challenge.
And that's why we dedicate a chapter to that. Yeah.
Yeah. So first step is for everybody is going to be, first off, you don't start a business without a business plan, right? And then second step is what is it? What you're talking about now, kind of setting expectations for yourself, your business, your clients.
Well, after you figure out how you're going to finance it.
You got to finance it. So second step is financing. So first step, business
Yeah.
plan, second step, get financing. Cause yeah, you got to protect yourself. Right. And you, how long, like, I know when I was bringing a lot of people into real estate, I would say, hey, have 6 months, 6 months income where you don't need to make any money for 6 months, but you'll still survive.
Yeah.
And that's just real estate. It doesn't have a lot of cost associated with, to be
Yeah.
honest with you, but people still have living expenses. So do you guys have like a timeline, or like, what does that look like when you talk
Depends
to
on where
people?
you're starting from. Again, it depends on what you've got. If you've got a spouse or somebody, making money, that's how.
Mm.
But I would say, it depends on where you're coming from. If you have, when I started freelancing, my ramp up time was faster than Jean's because I had more writing experience before I started. I had more to bring to the table, and I had, a partner who could give me advice and get me quickly going on things. It really depends on where you're going. I would say, as a writer, 6 months is a good idea.
If you master your trade, 6 months is reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, people are coming into things from the job market with contacts set up already, and that can go quite quickly. If you're starting something that's brand new and you don't have any foot in the industry in any way at all, then you gotta take 6 months, maybe a year, to get things going. But again, any restaurant or anybody who opens any business will know that they have to have money stored up so they can get through the.
Well, you would
beginning.
think, but sometimes you see them go to 2 months.
That's true. But it's hard.
We said the same thing.
Yeah, it's hard for creative people to think like a restaurant or a business. Like, we really have to think that way. So
farmers is a very good analogy.
Yeah, you're gonna plant for a long time.
Yeah. Oh, you plant the crop and you're sowing, right? Yeah, you're sowing, plowing, whatever they do in farms, right? You're waiting, essentially. You're harvesting. Yeah. So let me ask you this question: how does somebody know, hey, it's time? Like, maybe you're in your job right now, and how do you know it's time to go off and do your own thing? Start your own business.
That's a good question.
That's a good question. How do you know it's time? I mean, I think that the question is often like, how do you know you're going to be good at being self-employed? Lots of people have the idea that they'd like to do it. And, you've got to have a sense of what you're up against. You have to be organized. You need to be quite disciplined to run a business. There's a lot of freedom, and people will look at people like us and say, yay, so free. And so, they'll romanticize a little bit what we do. But you're going to be your own boss. That means you're your own accountant, your own publicist, your own webmaster, your own web designer. What else? I mean, you do everything. You're your receptionist, you're your publicist. Like, you have to do everything. Yeah. So it's a question of whether or not you've got the stuff to be a multitasker. Mm-hmm. And the organization skills to be able to get it all done, because you can't neglect any part of that, or it falls apart. You, as writers, they fall into the trap of getting a lot of money to produce something and neglecting to keep bringing in new clients, and then the project will end. They'll be too reliant on one source of income, and they won't have done the sales work that they need to do to go out and make sure they've still got business coming in. So those are the kinds of things you need to think about.
I think that when someone is starting to be tired of being told what to do, or when they want to do something that they think that their boss is off, or it is true that you're it's true that when you're freelancer or on your own, you're free in the sense that you can make some important decisions without referring to a boss. But it's true also that once you've made that decision, you have to live with your decision and assume all the responsibilities that go with it. But I would say that if you're tired personally, it would be my trigger point. Where if I'm tired of being told what to do and I have the impression that I'm losing my time.
I know, but who are we to talk? Like, we've never been employed for more than...
I've never been employed. So
for more than you for a month, me for 2 months.
Yeah, so
I'm unemployable myself, so I get it. I've tried a few times, but it doesn't work. But there's also, I mean, the other side of that question is there has there ever been a time where you met with someone and you're like, I don't know if I would start a business if I was you. I mean, have you ever had to tell somebody that? Because I think there are some people that, because the other side of it is, yeah, you get the freedom to do what you want, and no one's telling you what to do. But at the same time, you get the freedom to do what you want. No one's telling you what to do. So you could end up sitting around all day watching TV and going to the mall and all kinds of craziness and not do anything with your business. I've seen that happen to people.
Yeah. We both give a fair number of writing, like coaching and writing workshops. You can sort of see who's got the stuff. You can see how much they are willing to hustle. You can see that they ask a lot of questions, and that's really key.
Yeah.
Like people who go into things thinking like, I know it all already. I've got all the answers. When I hear that, I want to tell people, you really need to have a questioning spirit. You need to be sort of foraging all the time. You need to be digging stuff up and looking for stuff and finding new ways to do things and be open to things. And when I hear someone, obviously in the case of a writing, it's also a question of talent to a certain extent. But I don't know. It's not mostly talent. It's mostly the other stuff, I'd say. And you can spot it.
In my opinion, it's the people who are afraid of not being ready that are not made for it. You're never ready completely. You're never ready. So, when I see, for example, a writer saying, I'm not ready to start writing it. Well, if you're not ready to start writing, don't even think about being a writer. You should be writing. If you want to be a hairdresser and you're afraid to start cutting hair, you're not going to have a hairdressing business unless you want to hire people to do hairdressing. But then you have to not be afraid of hiring people, and because you will not be ready to hire people when you start hiring people. You're never quite ready. So you have to be able to jump in the water and swallow a bit of water and keep above the surface. I would say that's to me that when they start saying, when am I going to start writing? Well, you should be writing right now, So that's just writing, but it's true for other businesses.
Yeah, you should be doing something. I would be doing something you're passionate about, right? Like every day, like you can't wait to get at it. And so talk about this, and I don't know if this is in your book or not, but like the difference between having a job and having a business. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like,
well, one of the big problems is that you have to be a self-starter all the time about everything. So I think that's the big difference. We meet young creators who still are waiting around to be told what to do. They take the first offer in negotiations without question, as if they're being told by a superior. Those are all like boss job mentality things that don't work when you're self-employed. And we talk a lot. We have 2 chapters on negotiation in the book alone, because you need to be constantly, asking for more a little bit all the time, and as an employee, you have the sort of worry of offending your superiors by being too demanding. That's really key. And then as a self-employed person, you can't afford to worry about offending people by asking for too much. I mean, it's your job to understand the market and not let anybody take advantage of you.
In terms of a hierarchy, your client is your equal.
Yes.
He's not your superior or your boss. He's your equal. And there's a motto, we talk about it. Often people say the client is always right. The client is always right. No, the client is rarely right. In fact, especially when it's time to negotiate, the client is often wrong. And sometimes you have to actually teach the client about your field, because you are the expert, and the client hires you because they know less about it than you.
And sometimes that's the sign of a client that you don't want to work with, if they're not open to that.
Yeah. So I mean, it sounds like the majority of your clients are writers, is what I'm picking up on, and the majority of the people that listen to our podcast are salespeople and real estate agents and et cetera. But again, a lot of creatives anyway. So it does, and most of them want to start business. So what, leverage, how much do you, in your book, do you talk about leverage? And when I talk about leverage, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges of owning a business is trying to do everything yourself and never growing. Do you guys talk about that, or does that even really apply to a writer? Because when I think of a writer, I think it's kind of like, you are the business, right?
The book is actually not, our personal experience is that of writers, but the book is really geared towards dog groomer to consultancy of all types.
Okay.
We Julia and I work as a team. We are in fact associates, and we share tasks. For example, I'm doing the end work and management in terms of like bookkeeping and stuff like that. That's my part. So we share the load. We do have agents, and more than one, to help us doing representation, especially for books.
But most of the material in the book applies to any field. We're here talking about our personal experience, but almost all of it, and we use our experience as writers, but it's the business side of writing. It's not the writing side of writing. It's the same stuff that anybody that's developing a business in anything is going to go through. And the readers of the first edition, I
spoke in chambers of commerce and places like this because the appeal is very broad. For example, the book is divided between the 5 parts of a business: research, financing, production, research, sales, production, financing, and management. And for example, production, we don't talk about writing. Production here is good communication, it's billing, and it's collecting. Those are the common points. Indeed, you can, if you have trouble collecting with difficult clients, you may need to go through a collecting agency. It happened once to me that I almost went to one. But there are ways to avoid doing that. If you follow a certain procedure, you can reclaim what's owed to you with relatively good. I have a good track record for that. So good communication, good after sales service, absolutely important.
Being smart about using social media, about using the web, not over or under investing in your website. That's most of the book applies to any field, and particularly to small businesses and self-employed workers.
All right. So I'm going to see if we have looks like we had a group of people here on Clubhouse. I don't know if anybody has a question. If you do, just raise your hand, or if you give me a mic flash, if you're on a stage, and you can ask a question to, and doesn't look like we have any questions. I have another question. And well, first off, tell people how if somebody wants to get a copy of your book, what's the best way to get a copy of your book or get in touch with you guys?
You can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Those are the links we put on the website.
Yeah.
Should be available in all bookstores. You can order it directly from our publisher, Sutherland House in Canada.
Yeah.
But you can order the US copy or the Canadian copy. And just be careful. There is there's a Canadian version and a US version. The Canadian version has this little Canadian maple flag on the corner. The US version, no flag.
But is there a website? A website people can go to purchase it?
The best place is to go to our website, nadeaubarlow.com.
But any American bookseller will sell the American edition.
Yeah, it's distributed everywhere.
Yeah.
Awesome. And it's called Going Solo for people listening. And Nadeau Barlow is NADEAUBARLOW.com, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's it.
All right, perfect. Okay, so my final question actually looks like, I don't know if Cass has a question. Cass, do you have a question? Okay, so my final question for you guys is, well, there may be one more, but what causes most businesses to fail? Because the reality is a lot of small business fail, and I think most. You know that you probably know the number better than me, but it's
Yeah.
the majority, right? Do you know the number of businesses that fail,
Well,
and what causes that?
for in Canada, the life expectancy of a business for 5 years is about 60%, and 10 years is like 40.
Okay.
The
You
main
guys do better
problem,
than US then.
yeah,
Honestly, I feel like you guys are doing
the
better
main
than US
problem
business.
I would say is that people neglect what I call the 5 organs of a business. If you neglect research, if you neglect sales, financing, producing, and managing. These are the 5 basic functions of a business. They're like organs in the body. If you neglect one, you're putting yourself at risk. Research, developing new ideas may not affect you over a period of 2 or 3 years, but if other people in your field are following the time and you don't, you're falling behind. You're not renovating what you have to offer,
Mhm.
and at the other end, if you neglect your management, the IRS can be after you. But before that, stuff is going to fall through the cracks. You're going to forget that you build. You're not going to call back expenses that were charged twice, stuff like that, and if you don't finance well, you're not going to get the cash flow
But I would
need.
say that one of the big lessons that, over our now 30 years as self-employed workers is there are bad periods that you have to weather.
Mm-hmm.
And you sort of have to accept that, and you sort of have to have the determination to get through the bad periods. I mean, if you're only getting bad periods time after time after time and they get too bad, obviously that's a sign that things are not going to work. But you do need a certain amount of stoical determination to get through the bad periods and, put money in the bank when things are good. And, you get used to that after a while. But I see, especially creative people, giving up because of the fear of slow period. And I have a friend who's a close friend who's personal dresser, a personal shopper. And, she knows when her slow seasons are going to come, but sometimes she gets seasons that are slower than expected. And she says the same thing. She's been doing it for 20 years, and you just have to stick it out sometimes and be ready for things to be bad. And then the real challenge is using that free time that sometimes you get when you don't have a lot of business to do all the other things that are going to make your business better. Like, for us, working on projects for the future, working on our website, polishing up on skills to use social media. Like, there's time to do all that. And it's really hard to find the sort of motivation when you're feeling down. But that's really key to surviving, I think, is being able to really make use of
Good point.
the low periods to really put yourself out there, because one of the big things that keeps you going is having that distinct something that people want to come back to.
That's a really good point. I mean, because you're right. There's going to be times where maybe sales aren't coming in. Client, who knows? Even right now, I'm sure a lot of businesses are dealing. There's a lot going on as we're recording this, with inflation, with wars, with so much going on, and a lot of people are being affected by it. So, it is a mental game, right? Business is a huge mental game. Talk about that. The fear, though. I know one of the questions you guys had sent me was the fear, helping people overcome the fear of thinking too small. So how do you do that? What do you say?
Well, you do have to measure up to your own ideas, and indeed, it's a trap to think that, for example, you're a creator in Montreal and you can only and your ideas are only good for Quebecers. So some ideas, yes, are purely local in essence, and it's fine. But sometimes you have to recognize what among your ideas are the ones that can take you somewhere if you're ready to go that somewhere.
So we had a big project when we were still starting out, that just seemed way too big. And, we were almost not had the guts to write our first book, which turned out to be a big bestseller. We sold something like 200,000 copies in 5 languages, 6
Yeah,
languages. But we were like, when I remember when we wrote our pitch for this book, we were Canadian nobodies trying to publish a book in New York City and put it, make it sound like a potential bestseller, and we were very bold. I mean, we compared our book to Thomas Friedman, who's a very famous New York Times writer at the time, and we were just like putting ourselves out there. We had encouragement from people inside the industry. We were fortunate for that. But when I look back and think about that first letter I wrote, I mean, it just makes me laugh. But but I use it in my seminars with young writers to show them, like, you got nothing to lose. Use it all, and if it turns out to be successful, then you'll be glad. And if it doesn't, you'll have learned, and you can turn around and adjust it and do something else.
Sometimes there's a time, like one thing we explain in the section on financing and management. Sometimes it's important to borrow. People talk about a lot the importance of saving money and building your resources and all that. But borrowing is saving in reverse. You can wait for 15 years until you have the money, or you can borrow now in order to achieve your goal, because you'll then repay it as you go. So at one point, it's also a decision whether you borrow to achieve your purpose, or you wait and put away all the little nuts so that you get your little reserve of your little pot of nuts after a little while. But you can. So sometimes being bold is really, really like being bold and say, okay, I'm going to borrow and do it, and they will come.
I love it. Well, let's do final. I'd love to get kind of your final thoughts from both of you, like based on what we talked about today. For people that listening to this, what's the one thing you want them to walk away from this interview with? And we'll start with you, Julie.
The one thing I want them to walk away? Well,
yeah, if there's one thing they do or take from this, what do you want it to be?
Yeah, 2 things.
Yeah, okay, give them 2. That's the bonus. That's fine.
People.
I always say one thing because I know most people will do one thing and then it leads to something else. So, but yeah, we'll give them 2. That's fine.
I think you need to. I mean, I think just as we're wrapping up, that this is sort of coming together. But you need to be bold, but you need to be organized at the same time. That's what I think. And
bold and organized.
And organized, yeah. And you need to have a balance, obviously, between those. But that's what I would say, like in 2 words.
Yeah. Me, I would have one. I would say one point we didn't discuss is have a goal. Have a purpose.
Yeah.
Because once you start rolling, you're flooded with stuff to do, and it's the purpose you give yourself that will be the discerning element in all the choices that you have to make, and will take you somewhere and make you do the choices that you need to multiply in order to get to where you want to go.
I love it. Be bold, be organized, and have a purpose. I think you guys just summarized it great. So just want to thank you guys for being here today. Again, you can get a copy of the book at Going Solo is the name of the book. So make sure you, if you're in Canada, there's a version for you. If you're in US, there's a version for you. And also don't forget to go to YouTube and subscribe to the podcast. You can watch the live interview on YouTube at David I. Hill on YouTube. So appreciate you all being here. Thank you guys for being here. It was great. And I learned a lot. I took a ton of notes, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's a pleasure.